Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic has been out for over 2 months now, and it's finally given us some answers to the biggest mysteries from the franchise. With my last few videos, I've used Secret of the Mimic to solve characters and even parts of the timeline, where today I'm going to combine these theories into one single video. So let's cover Ultimate Custom Night and why there are multiple souls torturing William Afton, Security Breach and its sticky note room, the Blob who might be possessed by souls from Secret of the Mimic, and why Glamrock Freddy is actually the protagonist of the newest FNAF game. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and let's solve Five Nights at Freddy's together, starting with Ultimate Custom Night. By now I'm sure many of you have seen amazing theories on Secret of the Mimic and on Edwin Murray's deceased son, David. Like theories by T-Dreads and Fazbear's Entertainment on God David, a theory by Flipside on Midnight Motorist and how David might be at the center of it all, and a theory by The Unworthed Truth on Ultimate Custom Night that I want to expand on today in this video. UCN is a game that divides the fandom in multiple aspects and is one of the more interesting games as there is a ton of unsolved and hidden mysteries. But now with Secret of the Mimic, I believe this newest game has finally provided us with some answers. But first I recommend checking out all these videos by these talented creators as they can fundamentally change what we know about the franchise. So my name is Bronze Films, and let's go over how Secret of the Mimic tells us that there are dozens of souls torturing William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night. Starting with what we know about a new tragedy, Fall Fest.
What are you waiting for?
In order to truly cover Fall Fest, let's go back to the very start when it was first introduced. In the Help Wanted Dreadbreed DLC, we learn that this DLC takes place within the actual Fall Fest carnival, as the game's hub contains a banner advertising Fall Fest 1983, an important year for the franchise. We then saw a poster for Fall Fest 1970 revealed in the Help Wanted 2 game hub, as we can also assume that the carousel minigame focusing around Moon where you have to fix the carousel while avoiding him, and the Carney minigame where you shoot at targets with a phaser blast for points, both took place in the Fall Fest carnival itself, and up to this point we would only get more references and Easter eggs to this carnival. In Security Breach we found this arcade machine of Balloon Boy which took place in a carnival, this poster advertising Fredbear's singing show. In Ruin we saw these carnival animal mascot suits, and even the Mimic wore a carnival lion suit in the Scooper ending. And now finally, with the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic, we now have concrete information on the Fall Fest Carnival, how it's connected to Fazbear's, and its eventual downfall, which I think is the big mystery we can connect to Ultimate Custom Night into this purgatory. Secret of the Mimic is centered around MCM, Murray's Costume Manor, a contracting business owned by Edwin that would create mascot suits and technology for companies and events. One of these companies was of course Fazbear's Entertainment, who commissioned various projects like Chica's Party World. This is the first project we hear of them working together on, a location we've known almost nothing about before this point. Here in a text log we learn that a client, or Fazbear's, is very happy with the design, and that Chica's design came from Fiona, Edwin Murray's wife. And of course we learn that MCM was commissioned to work on Fall Fest. We find the same Fall Fest 1970 poster from Help Wanted 2 alongside collectibles from the actual carnival. We find a snow globe from Fall Fest that looks similar to promotional art for the event featuring animatronics and even the puppet as a scarecrow. We even find an admissions ticket for Fall Fest, a ticket with the same colors from the poster and something we've never really seen before. And like I mentioned, it's assumed we already saw 2 exact attractions from Fall Fest 1970 and Help Wanted 2, meaning there was a phaser blast type of attraction that included the Carney animatronic that could have possibly been created by Edwin for Fazbear's, which could also mean that the other Rockstar animatronics were also part of the MCM catalog, which is why we see him show up once more in FNAF Pizzeria Simulator. And I think we can say the exact same thing about the carousel minigame, as we know Moon was also created by Edwin. But most importantly, we learn that Edwin's wife Fiona decided to go to Fall Fest with the installation team because she felt that something was wrong.
Ed, I hope this message reaches you as soon as you get a break. I have to go help the Fall Fest crew, just for a few days until the installation is finished. It's hard to explain. I just have this terrible feeling like I need to be there so nothing goes wrong, just in case. Trisha will babysit David while I'm gone. I love you both, and I'll be back next week.
This trip was supposed to last a week, but as we learn in another voice log, Fiona never returns and Edwin is forced to raise David completely on his own.
Oh, why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here with me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own? His life is ruined. My life is ruined.
But how and why? How did Fiona die at Fall Fest? Well, to find out, the first thing we know for almost certain is that it was a fire that killed her. The 1970s Fall Fest fire, a fire I'll mention again later on when talking about UCN. In both Up 1 and 2 Fall Fest minigames, both of them end with a secret level where the attraction catches fire. With the carousel minigame, you face Jack-O-Moon while fixing the carousel once more, but in the middle of the minigame, a fire will randomly start engulfing the attraction and move slowly. With the Carnage minigames focused on FNAF 2, after completing the level like normal, the arm of the cardboard cutout of Dreadbear will snap off, causing electrical sparks to go flying, which will also cause a fire. The fire will spread across the wagons and even to Carnage himself, which will end the minigame. And in the Five Nights at Freddy's 3 Phaser Blast level, we then see the aftermath of the fire while defending yourself against Springtrap. You'll find the wagons and even Carnage completely burned with nothing in the attraction left. So it appears that a fire brought down Fall Fest, meaning we can assume it's what killed Fiona, and we almost know for certain who caused this fire, the franchise's most infamous killer, William Afton. Throughout this game, we learn how William Afton was slowly sabotaging Edwin's business and slowly taking over his own company. Through audio and text logs, we learn how William was in contact with a leak from MCM who gave him the contact information of all the employees of the company. And we also know some employees sold Edwin's work to most likely William.
Attention traders, admin wing permissions have been revoked. And no, you can't clear out your desks. You stole my work. Now your jackets, purses, and coffee mugs, and anything else belongs to me. Maybe I'll go find someone to sell your stuff to. How does that feel?
We also learned that William and Fazbear's Entertainment kept delaying a project that Edwin was working on for them, the prototype FNAF 1 location. In the research and development area, we can find the prototype FNAF 1 pizzeria that has the exact same hallways, offices, and stage. Of course, there are also the prototype animatronics of Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, and Chica, alongside the FNAF 1 endoskeletons. So after delaying the project over and over, Edwin would lose his friends, money, and after the death of his family, he would finally lose his company and everything he's built.
I feel stupid recording this, but I just hope somehow that you can still hear me. I can't do this alone. The change orders are killing me. Our employees, my friends, they keep leaving. The money's gone. I just need to finish the new Fazbear project, and then everyone will come back. We can get back to normal. I miss my friends. Our friends. I miss you. I miss you more than you'll ever know.
And clearly William is successful in taking over Edwin's life, so what if to make sure that Edwin's life would crumble and he would lose everything? What if William killed Fiona with the Fall Fest fire? I think the first major piece of evidence is the carousel minigame. In the Jack-O-Moon level, when looking from the outside perspective, we actually see that the fire started in this barn and that it then spread to the rest of the attraction. So what if William was inside that barn? He would start the fire where no one would be able to see him and would then disappear. Fiona would be somewhere else in the carnival helping the installation team and most likely didn't know a fire started until it was too late. And it appears that moon.exe actually confirms this. As I'm sure many of you know by now, moon.exe is a minigame accessible through the helper terminals and acts as a way to tell a story about the Murrays. There's a ton to go over in moon.exe, but most importantly you run into Sun, who we can confidently say is meant to represent Fiona, who is described as the old woman inside of the rundown cabin in the woods. We know this for certain as we face the F10 and 4 program, which is the name of the AI also known as M1, a program created by Edwin to babysit David. So when this program or Fiona begins to talk to us, the monitors behind the computer display the exact same icon of Sun from moon.exe, which is most likely saying that they are one and the same and can be used to represent one another. And when looking back to the minigame, we find statues that are clearly supposed to represent Edwin and Fiona, but Fiona's statue is burnt with the Fall Fest globe collectible that I mentioned earlier right in front of it, which could imply that this statue or Fiona was burnt by a fire that occurred in this event in the snow globe, Fall Fest. And on top of that, you can also find a seamstress building that was burnt to the ground, another way to show Fiona was in that fire, as we know she loves sewing together hand puppets, like the Foxy Crew hand puppets we see in the theater. And finally, when facing Big Top and handing him the Fall Fest admissions ticket that I mentioned earlier, he says, "This is the one. This is where Sun left, leaving them behind." I think it's obvious that this is yet another way how the game is telling us how she died. The one is the Fall Fest Carnival where Sun or Fiona would leave to but would never return from. And for one final piece of evidence, in the Carnage minigame that I mentioned earlier, in the final level, the only thing we see left after the fire is Springtrap or William Afton, which could be a way to tell us that he's the only thing that remained and stayed alive after the fire, since he caused it and was able to escape. But enough about Fall Fest, now we can finally take a look at William Afton's personal hell.
Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, friend.
Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Custom Night really needs no introduction. It's William Afton being tortured for eternity by the one you should not have killed. Who this is a controversial debate on its own, with some believing it's the Crying Child, Cassidy, Andrew, and in the Unwithered Truth theory, he even suggested it could be David, Edwin's deceased son from Secret of the Mimic. Now for the sake of this theory, and because I love that video, we are going to say it's David, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm proposing that David isn't alone in holding William in this purgatory. Not only is there 1, 5, or even 10 other souls, but I think we can go as far to say that all 50 selectable characters represent a soul tormenting William. Now before you click off the video, hear me out as I go through a surprisingly decent amount of evidence. It's already been theorized that there are other souls in UCN based on voice lines that make it seem like the one you should not have killed isn't alone. So because of this, I decided to go back and to listen to every single voice line of every single animatronic. And I found that there are at least 15 different voice lines from different characters that indicate other souls are aware of where they are and what they are doing. They also just aren't the one you should not have killed speaking through them like with the mediocre melodies. They're completely separate souls who would want to torture William. Take a listen to these voice lines from Withered Bonnie and Ballora.
What is this new prison? Is it me trap or is it you? Perhaps it is us both.
These are strange circumstances that have brought us together.
Withered Bonnie's line implies that even he doesn't know how he ended up here and that it might have even been against his will, something I'll touch more on soon. With Ballora, once again she is aware of the circumstances, and this feels like someone new speaking, who may have also known William at one point. Now take a listen to these voice lines from Nightmare Balloon Boy and Rockstar Bonnie.
There just isn't room in here for both of us.
So good to see you again, my truest friend. But now your life must end.
With Nightmare Balloon Boy, we once more see the reassuring idea of there being someone else here with William, as he is even being tortured by the same nightmares he would force test subjects to go through. With Rockstar Bonnie, whoever soul this is was true friends with William at one point when they're both presumably alive, which brings me to the core of this theory. William Afton has had much more victims than any of us could have anticipated. More than the souls of Charlie Emily, possibly David Murray, souls of the missing children incident, or even the dead children incident. We're talking about dozens of victims, and I think most of them came from one place, FNAF. Like I said, if William was responsible for murdering Fiona in a fire, to me it's hard to believe that she would be the only victim or casualty. Especially since in Help Wanted 2, it seems that we are playing these games while they're active and while the park would be open. So when this fire would randomly start in a barn and would spread to attractions, this would all happen when FNAF is actively open. Meaning there would be Fiona's installation team, employees of FNAF, and families, all most likely caught in this fire and became William Afton's casualties. They would all then become vengeful spirits with the perfect place for a reunion where they could all get revenge, being William Afton's purgatory or nightmare fueled by agony, depending on what you believe in. When looking back to the voice lines, now take a listen to these lines by Orville and Rockstar Foxy while keeping the FNAF fire in mind.
He tried to release you. He tried to release us. But I'm not gonna let that happen. I will hold you here. I will keep you here. No matter how many times they burn us.
Yarg, ye play with fire, and sometimes ye get burned.
With Foxy, obviously we get a reference to a fire, which I know is something broad, but we can't connect this Rockstar to Carney, who was in the FNAF fire and is technically a Rockstar animatronic as well. But this line about a fire is just the beginning. With Orville, he is definitely referring to Henry Emily, who tried to free William and the other souls in animatronics in Pizzeria Simulator. But of course, the one you should not have killed stops this and is speaking through Orville. But at the end of the line, he says, no matter how many times they burn us, that's right, multiple souls. Sure, this could be referring to the other souls in FFVS like Charlie or Elizabeth, but that game suggests they were able to move on and that every soul in that game moved on besides William. In a way, all remaining souls had their happiest day. But victims from FNAF wouldn't be able to move on, especially since it seemed like they were never mentioned anywhere else in the timeline. So they could be the other souls Orville is referencing to holding William back. Now take a listen to lines that are at this point infamous voice lines from Jacko Chica.
I am a burning reminder of your misdeeds. Greetings from the fire, and from the one you should not have killed.
With the first line, Jacko Chica could clearly act as a reminder of the Fall Fest fire and his actions of burning innocent people. With the next line, we again hear from the one you should not have killed, but this time he isn't speaking through Jacko Chica. Chica just mentions him as she greets William from the quote-unquote fire, maybe the Fall Fest fire. If this were to really be the case, then I think we can even say that this is Fiona's vengeful spirit itself. We know in a way Fiona was responsible for creating Chica and Chica's party world, so is it really that far-stretched to say that this is a way to represent her? Sure, we mostly saw her through the Sun characters and through the puppets, but these are her creations just like Chica. That's why Fiona's greeting William from the fire, since that's where she was murdered. This could mean that this is a mother and son duo torturing William in this nightmare, which is kinda wholesome in a way. Aww. But to really just throw an idea out there, let's take a listen and look at the character of Nightmare Freddy.
I am given flesh to be your tormentor.
Here this line implies that David could have given these vengeful souls quote-unquote flesh and new identities as animatronics from William Afton's past. That's why we see Scraptrap and Springtrap. They obviously aren't actually William, but different souls given his identity to almost mock him and his failures. And this next line only supports this even further.
I am remade, but not by you, by the one you should not have killed.
This is clear confirmation that the one you should not have killed is rebuilding these animatronics for this nightmare, and again, I think it's also to pair an animatronic with each soul. Also take a look at Nightmare Freddy's icon when selecting characters. We see Freddy in the back with the Freddles in front of him. Looks normal, right? But to me it looks like a dad posing for a picture with his 3 children. Okay, whoa, I know that seems crazy and just wrong, and I could definitely be looking too deep into things just like Mr. Hippo says.
Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all. Maybe it doesn't mean anything at all.
But in context of Fall Fest, it could make a lot of sense. Like I said earlier, if it really was open when this fire occurred, then of course there would be families like a dad and his kids. If they also got caught up in this fire and became casualties of William Afton, then it could make sense they would become vengeful spirits that would return in the form of Nightmare Freddy and his Freddles. But really this is just speculative, and I admit it doesn't have the strongest evidence towards it. Also, because this is William Afton's personal nightmare, we of course see artifacts from his life, like posters from different pizzerias, a recreation of a room from his house he most likely used only for experiments, and we can actually find a reference to Fall Fest. In Pizzeria Simulator, we were introduced to this Spookfest poster, which at the time didn't have a meaning to, nor could we connect it to anything. But then in the Help Wanted and in the Dreadbird DLC I've talked about all video, we saw this poster return in this barn, which to me is saying that Fall Fest and Spookfest are one and the same, different names for the same event. But we also saw this variation of a Fall Fest poster in Ultimate Custom Night and in one of the hallways. If everything around him is supposed to be a reminder of his misdeeds, then this poster would be perfect. It's where he would take dozens of lives as casualties, and having to stare at this poster over and over while being tormented by his own creations seems like a fitting end for this character. Although for saying the majority of these souls came from Fall Fest, there is still a chance that there are some souls we're familiar with. Unwithered Truth already brought up a lot of great evidence to why the crying child could possibly be represented through Nightmare Fredbear, and why he would even need to torture William. So if this really is a reunion, I do believe CC could be a part of this group. Or instead of them directly being in Afton's nightmare, it could also relate to memories. Now I know earlier I said that victims of the MCI or Charlie Emily most likely have moved on, which I still believe is true, so what if it's the agony of their memories which is making them return? We know memories have had a crucial component in the franchise, and especially with these newer games like in FNAF Help Wanted 2. That's why we have 2 puppets and 2 different Charlies, 2 sets of memories both caused by William, which could also be why they sound very different.
Seeing you powerless is like music to me. There is room for one more.
We could also apply the same reasoning to the victims of the Fall Fest fire, where it's the mix of the agony of their memories being in that fire that created this nightmare or purgatory for William. But I still personally like the idea more that it's their actual souls finally getting revenge with the help of David and even possibly Fiona. Now I don't know if this was all just a group chat created by David or something like that, since I don't really have a reasonable explanation to how they would all come together in one single place. But what I do know for certain is that it's all just a theory.
A game theory!
By no means am I saying that anything in this video is confirmed or that it should be taken as canon, especially since we actually don't know anything about the Fall Fest fire. Yes, we finally got some information about it in Secret of the Mimic and how it's connected to Fiona and her death. But besides that, who caused it, why, and if there were any other casualties could simply go any other way. I also understand the criticism of even using Secret of the Mimic to solve parts of the earlier story, as when these games were released, we can assume that Scott didn't have the Mimic and his new family planned all the way down the line. Instead, I think it was just ideas Scott had that were fleshed out games later and would then be connected back to the original games, which is why I think multiple souls in UCN would even work. So just take all of this as speculation, and again, it's just a theory. So with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for watching. Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories that you have, and if you believe Secret of the Mimic can solve Ultimate Custom Night. Now let's look at Security Breach and its two biggest mysteries, Burntrap and the Sticky Note Room, as not only do I think this game tells us how the pizzaplex is connected to MCM, but it finally gives us an answer to the infamous Sticky Note Room and to who Burntrap really is. So my name is Bronze Films, and join me as I cover why the pizzaplex was built directly over Murray's costume manor, why the fixed mimic from the moon.exe ending is the animatronic who lived in the sewer area and was the one who wrote on all of the sticky notes, and most importantly why the mimic is actually Burntrap and why they have always meant to be the same. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and let's get started. Before we can even look at Burntrap or other big mysteries like that, I first want to look at what I think is one of the most overlooked areas from Security Breach, the sewers. I also want to give credit to Johnny the Night Guard, who made a discovery that will be mentioned later in this video, and it's what inspired me to take a look at this area, so thanks a ton. In order to reach this area behind the food court and on level B3, you find this elevator, which looks very old and withered by the way, almost as if it came from somewhere else. But you reach the docks and laundry area, where venturing to the back you'll find a long set of stairs leading to the sewers. And I believe that this entire sewer area is MCM, meaning the pizzaplex was built directly on top of it, and it looks like they didn't even try to hide it. Once in the sewers, we find a lot, and I mean a lot of trash that came from the pizzaplex itself and anything that was left from MCM. There are destroyed staff bots, which are important, so remember that for later. Walls are caving in against themselves, and there's a ton of rubble and red bricks that could have only come from one place, Murray's costume manor. Comparing these bricks with walls from the pizzaplex or even with walls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place in the sequel, they just simply don't match up. But when comparing them with the walls from Secret of the Mimic, there is a clear similarity, and the foundation that is even keeping the roof stable or the sewage area here is clearly from MCM as well. Again, we can compare old wooden pipes that are almost identical, and that's also why it looks like these walls could collapse at any moment since they are decades old. There are a few big rooms that show us more trash from MCM and were most likely rooms or areas that we're even familiar with, like the large theater or even the parking lot. But some of the strongest evidence comes from these 1970s style TVs that could have only come from Secret of the Mimic, which takes place in 1979, and we find the exact same TVs throughout that gameplay. This maze section where Chica chases you is almost identical to this maze section from the vent Arnold goes into with the parachute ending. Here we find similar walls and bricks, and even the ways the walls are formed almost look identical once more. But an odd detail I want to point out is this room where the sewer level begins. Walls are completely made up of car parts like tires, gears, and steering wheels. These parts could have possibly come from all the cars left with the MCM or Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place location, but regardless it does look like MCM is under the pizzaplex, so what could all this possibly mean? Well, I think it's obvious that Fazbear's Entertainment is reusing whatever they can from Murray's costume manor to save time, energy, and money, which fits perfectly with what we know about the company. Reaching the lowest level B1, you find wires that resemble the exact same material and look of Jackie's arms. They are the same orange flexible arms that we of course see Jackie use to chase us around the manor, before ultimately disappearing for the rest of the game. So what if after Fazbear's attained the MCM building and found the remains of Jackie, they would keep this animatronic for parts to use later, where decades later either her exact arms or replicas were used as wires that continued throughout most of the sewer. Although this could 100% be a stretch, it's definitely not a coincidence they look very similar. And it's not the only place we find reused things or assets from the manor. When taking a look at the upgrade station, it uses a similar interface as all of the computers from Secret of the Mimic. It's a green interface with pixelated 8-bit buttons. Of course this could be a stretch as well, but it could also be the reason why the computers in Security Breach and Ruin appear to be much older than the time period those games take place in. In the loading dock area I mentioned earlier and in this server room, we can actually find basically identical orange conduit fluid in these pipes that we can of course find all throughout the manor in Secret of the Mimic. We can assume it serves the same purpose here to power parts of the pizzaplex, and if it was somehow left over from MCM, then it makes perfect sense that Fazbear's Entertainment would reuse it here. Maybe it's even similar to the liquid that is powering the charging stations, as it even brings Glamrock Chica back to life in Ruin. But if Fazbear's would go as far to reuse parts of old animatronics and of a building that are decades old, what if they reused a certain endoskeleton we're all familiar with to bring back their most infamous villain? This sticky note room is something I mentioned briefly, and it's one of the biggest mysteries or a unsolved mystery of FNAF Security Breach, with fans theorizing about this room over the course of the few years this game has been out, and even today it's going to be one of the main parts of this video. Before even reaching the sewers, you find this room filled with dozens of sticky notes with different messages or drawings on them. Some examples include a sticky note with the message "Happy Place," "Party Time," and "All of my friends." There are also drawings of things for my birthday party like cake, presents, balloons, and people. We find nightmare staffbot heads, candles, and as one of the notes says, "This is my home, leave," it tells us that something lived on here or was held captive. There's a ton more sticky notes that I'll go over soon, so don't worry, but it's also worth noting how above this room we find a recreation of the Afton family using staff pots. At the head of the table, this staff bot represents Miss Afton, the magician bot is William Afton, the circus baby bot is Elizabeth Afton, the worker bot is Michael Afton, and this bot without a head is pretty self-explanatory to be the crying child. So whoever was in this room not only wrote all the sticky notes, but they also made a replica of a family. So who is it? Well, some popular theories believe it could have been Gregory, who's actually a robot, the crying child, who's also a robot, or even Charlie Emily, who is, you guessed it, a robot. But to find an answer, when looking at all the clues this game gives us, we first find a desk with the blueprints for the security breach endoskeletons in the first of the sticky notes. These first set of sticky notes include drawings of Freddy, tally marks counting something, and the number 141. This was most likely a workstation for one of the employees who knew about what was in the sewers. As you go through the sewers, more sticky notes are scattered around, and something I haven't seen many people point out is that wherever there are sticky notes, there are also cameras watching whatever was writing these. Sure, this could be for gameplay reasons, but we can also apply a practical reason to it, employees studying something. Another point I want to bring up is that sticky notes are actually scattered around all of the pizzaplex, meaning whoever did this walked freely at one point and traveled around the pizzaplex, leaving sticky notes wherever they went. And a text log I'll mention soon actually supports this. So we have something living in the sewers and in the pizzaplex while writing on sticky notes that revolve around birthday parties, a family, and friends, while also being watched by Fazbear's Entertainment. So I think it's obvious who this character is that needs no introduction. It's always been theorized that the Mimic could be the one in this room, especially because we see a repeated theme of 3 on the sticky notes, 3 things like balloons, presents, and words, which could represent Edwin, David, and the Mimic. So this isn't a new theory by any means, but what is and how secret of the Mimic solves security breach is that this game tells us what version of the Mimic was down here. In the moon.exe ending, after completing this minigame and receiving the glitch permissions by Sun, Arnold is able to reset or fix the violent Mimic back into a state where he is mimicking David and is completely innocent. The fixed Mimic picks up the white tiger plushie that belonged to David and sleeps in a bed while listening to a bedtime story by Fiona and Edwin. So what if it's this fixed David Mimic that lived in the sewers and wrote all of the sticky notes? When taking a look at this sticky note, "This is my home, leave," this now makes perfect sense and should be taken literally. I mentioned earlier how the pizzaplex is on top of MCM, which was the Mimic's home and secret of the Mimic, as that's where Edwin created him and programmed him to mimic David and Fiona. This is why Fazbear's kept the Mimic in the sewers, as that's where he would feel the most at home. All the sticky notes referring to a birthday party could also be connected to this Mimic, since David's birthday would be celebrated every single year with cake, balloons, and presents. And the 3 people wearing party hats could again be Edwin, David, and the Mimic. We also find a sticky note of a security guard, which could actually be Arnold. Arnold was the one who fixed the Mimic and is the first person it saw after being reset to mimic David. This drawing could be of this moment, or it could be of any other employee of the pizzaplex. But this could also explain the cameras, which would now act as like nanny cams, watching the Mimic everywhere he went, leaving a trail of sticky notes behind him. And in general, we know David liked drawing, as he made this drawing of himself with the Mimic, and we see multiple drawings in his secret tent. So here the Mimic is mimicking David by drawing on all of the sticky notes. I also think that all of the endoskeletons from FNAF Security Breach were based on this Mimic and his design. They do look similar design-wise, and most importantly, that's why we find blueprints at the start of the stairs into the sticky note room. Whoever was working on the designs was most likely in contact with the Mimic, as this is where the sticky notes begin. Maybe the Mimic even saw it as a play area, which is why it's a mess, while the employee worked on the designs. But like I said, this also means that the Mimic was walking freely around the pizzaplex and the other employees were aware of it. With this message titled "The Job Security," it reads, "Where is everyone? Leo was the only one who had a copy of the maze control key, but I haven't seen him for months. Maybe that creepy bot knows where the key is. Leo was supposed to train it to work the maze. Instead, he tricked the bot into doing busy work under the daycare theater. I'll check after the all-staff meeting tonight." This creepy bot could definitely be the Mimic, but the only issue here is that it's being trained to do busy work and it makes it seem like it isn't a child like we all saw in the ending. So what if intentionally or unintentionally its programming was being reverted to its corrupted and violent state, as the sticky notes might even support this? This has been pointed out previously, but some sticky notes are simply scribbles, drawings, and words that are hard to understand, but others include more complex drawings or easier to understand words. And other notes include sentences that don't look like they were written by a child, but rather someone who is basically an adult. We see a clear progression from the mimic writing on sticky notes as a child to then writing like an adult. And the duffel bag message suggests that this progression was caused by employees reversing his programming and training it to do their busy work. But by no means does the mimic story in the pizzaplex end here, as I think one act of violence changed everything. The reason I even bring up some incident is because of this area found in the upgrade station of the pizzaplex. Here we find a few glass cells where we can assume Fazbear's was holding things to observe and experiment on. As behind these cells we find endoskeletons locked up in cages and an endoskeleton that seems to be corrupted. But at the end of this hallway we find a cell that has its glass broken and a table flipped over, implying that something broke out. And near the entrance we find a destroyed endoskeleton that was most likely attacked by whatever escaped. Of course I believe this to be the mimic whose programming has gone rogue and has stopped mimicking David and his behavior. He was most likely locked in this cell after some violent incident but then escaped to continue his rampage. But why? Why does it look like the mimic's programming was purposely reversed so he would become violent and rageful like he was decades ago? Well, to answer that we need to look at another big mystery from Security Breach. Burntrap is one of those characters that also doesn't need an introduction. Fans including myself have theorized if he's meant to be William Afton or if he was supposed to be the Mimic from the start. I've always been a believer that Burntrap and the Mimic were two separate characters, but today I'm finally changing my mind. If the Mimic's programming was being reverted, then what if it was being changed to mimic William Afton? Now who would do this and why this would be done can be a video on its own, but I think the evidence lies back in the sticky note room. When looking at the notes, it looks like the mimic was being fed information which confused its programming. We see drawings that clearly come from a child, but one sticky note says grown-ups only, which was always a weird detail to me. If this was a child like the note suggests, why would it refer to itself as an adult? Well, what if the mimic's programming was confused in mimicking David and William Afton, with David's sides of drawings and William Afton's side of violent tendencies? This could also explain the Afton family staff bots. Why would anyone who isn't a part of this family want to make recreations of them? If the mimic was being fed data of William Afton and his life, then he could recreate this family that he thinks he's a part of, which could explain the family notes or even these are my friends notes. We could then even apply William's life to some of these sticky notes, like the 3 people being his 3 children, all the references to birthday parties relating to all of his pizzerias hosting birthday parties. But of course the final goal would be to bring back William Afton or Springtrap, which is why the mimic would revert to his aggressive state. Remember all of the destroyed staff bots I mentioned earlier? Well, I think it's the mimic almost practicing to be violent on these staff bots that will then be left in the sewers. We know he can easily take care of these staff bots, so here's being taught the same thing. But to try to really convince you, take a look at the purple glow effect we see all throughout the sticky note room and in the sewer area. Look familiar? It's the same purple glow effect we see in Burntrap's room and everywhere else he's previously been. This effect has previously been used to prove that the mimic is Burntrap, as brightening the room he's revealed in, we find the exact same purple glow effect we see everywhere else. So what if, to really make the mimic like William, they expose him to this purple gas we saw in this charging station, which could be anything from remnant to agony, which would then be left behind in areas of the sewers. I think this is even the reason we hear about murders in one of the endings. Vanny didn't murder them because of glitch trap, but she did it so the mimic could learn from it and mimic her. It's the other way around. We also find newspapers down in the sinkhole that could have been about the missing children incident that the mimic would learn about, but at this point this could just be a stretch honestly. But after his escape, I think he was caught once more and shoved into this charging station so he could fully become William Afton. Flesh in an unused spring bunny suit would be added onto him, and our final product is Burntrap from Security Breach. Okay, whoa, I know that's a lot, and most of this is just my personal beliefs based on the sticky notes and purple glow effect. Although it can be a stretch, I do believe it's possible because of how this game was developed. Based on the Doco Scott Cawthon interview, we learned that there are essentially 2 stories within Security Breach, one from Scott and the other from Steelwood Studios. Now I'm not sure who had what idea, but based on the sticky notes and the Afton family bots, it looked like one party wanted whoever was in this room to be someone from the Afton family, while the other party had the mimic plan based on the epilogue stories. And Burntrap wasn't even what Scott Cawthon had in mind originally, as he was only supposed to stand still and act as a decaying movie prop. So regardless if this is Burntrap or not, what I do think we can say for certain is that the fixed mimic from the moon.exe ending is the one who was in the sticky note room. But most importantly, this is just a theory.
A game theory!
Like with all of my theories, nothing in this video is confirmed, nor should anything be taken as canon. This is just an answer to the sticky note room from Security Breach using Secret of the Mimic and its endings. So what do you guys think? Who wrote on all the sticky notes? Was it the Mimic? Can we somehow connect this to Burntrap, and will this mystery ever be solved? So moving on, let's look at the Blob, who is also known as Tangle, and what souls possess this amalgamation of animatronics. Now I know that's a bold claim, especially since Secret of the Mimic seemed to answer mysteries that were more connected to the earlier parts of the timeline, like who created what animatronics animatronics and how the mimic fits with games like FNAF 4 or Sister Location, but I think we can use clues from this game, or rather tragedies, to tell us the true identity of Security Breach's most complicated and intriguing character. In a case where this game's story was essentially split into two different versions, what if FNAF's Secret of the Mimic is now the key to having one final answer to who the Blob really is? And if this animatronic is possessed by the spirits or agony of different people? Well, my name is Bronze Films, and let's solve who is possessing the Blob, how many souls are possessing this animatronic, and how the pizzaplex is the center of this new theory. So please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I really do appreciate all the support on the channel. Before we can begin to tackle the amalgamation that is Tangle, it's important to first understand the technicians from Secret of the Mimic. Throughout the main gameplay, we play as Arnold, a technician hired by Fazbear's Entertainment to retrieve the schematics to the Mimic endoskeleton. In one of the endings, Arnold inserts the data driver into the Mimic and fixes its programming, where we can then assume he is able to escape MCM. But in two other endings, Arnold is killed and stopped by the Mimic, as the Mimic flips his work van over or stuffs him into one of the prototype animatronic suits. Arnold fails to retrieve the schematics and isn't actually the only one to do so, or wasn't the only technician sent by Fazbear's. In Murray's costume Manor, you can find other technicians that were sent by Fazbear's and also ultimately failed to retrieve the Mimic schematics. Outside of the Manor, you can even find an abandoned work van that is run down and destroyed. We can assume it belonged to one of the other teams that were sent to MCM, and this van serves as a small clue to their disappearances and murders. Not only do we know that these victims were part of Team 12, but we can also find their actual bodies stuffed inside of mascot suits by the Mimic. Through the text logs, we can even find 3 messages that came from 3 of those technicians that show us exactly where they were killed and what suits they were stuffed inside of. With the first message, it reads,
I hope this message reaches someone. There's something outside. I have no idea what it wants. But I can still hear Thompson's screams. I didn't sign up for this.
We find this text log in the back rooms of the welcome lobby, and right next to the mailbox we find a body inside of a jester costume with only their right arm and leg sticking outside of the suit. This message was most likely their final thoughts before being attacked by the Mimic, and Thompson was also most likely a part of Team 12 and can be any of the other bodies we find. But with the second message, it reads,
I'm almost there. I can see the last permission upgrade. I'm going to get that Christmas bonus, even if it kills me.
So checking a locker near this mailbox and behind the executive permissions machine, you'll find the body of a technician who left this message. Here he is wearing a Swing Bee mascot head, and he was chasing a similar bonus to the one Arnold was offered for retrieving the schematics.
You can't fool me though, you're just trying to snag one of those $25 gift certificates at the end of the year for outstanding performance.
He obviously fails and is one of the secret jump scares of this game, but with the final text log we can actually pinpoint exactly where and what happened to this technician.
I stopped the show. Whew. I don't think there's another way in, so I should be safe for now. There's a maniac in a costume chasing me, like something out of a drive-in movie. No one is ever going to believe me. Just one guy or a whole group of psychos?
This is of course the same welcome show Arnold faces at the beginning of the game, and the Mimic jumping from suit to suit is also something Arnold faces. But above the welcome show you can find yet another body of a technician hanging from the ceiling in a jester mascot suit with their left arm and leg hanging out. Among these 3 bodies we can also find a body inside of a dog mascot suit in the power room, a body stuffed inside of a hedgehog suit in the theater's audience holding a gift box, and 2 bodies that are hidden out of the player's view. One is crushed underneath a shelf with their arm popping out, and the other body is stuffed under a pile of different mascot suits, which brings the total number of dead technicians from Team 12 to 7. So 7 dead bodies that are left in MCM, but how does any of it connect to the Blob? In FNAF Security Breach, Gregory goes to the lowest point in the pizzaplex, which was revealed to be the location from FNAF 6. There he finds a sinkhole that goes to an even lower level where he finds the Blob, an amalgamation of animatronic parts, wires, and parts of characters we're all familiar with. The Blob tries to stop Gregory, but he is able to burn burntrap alongside the Blob and is able to escape the pizzaplex with Glamrock Freddy. Blob then reappears in a small cameo near the beginning of the Ruin DLC, where it can be seen inside of a hole in the wall before it quickly backs away and becomes out of view, as it will then disappear for the rest of the game. Down in the sinkhole you can also find a trail of oil left behind from the Blob, as the trail leads to this hole in the wall. This can tell us that the Blob is within the pizzaplex's walls and structure, meaning it's most likely the reason the pizzaplex collapsed against itself was because the Blob would hollow out the foundation with massive tunnels, not because of an earthquake like newspapers suggested. But what is this amalgamation of different animatronics? Well, it includes the FNAF 1 versions of Chica and Bonnie, it includes the puppet, Circus Baby, parts of Mangle, and at the head of it all is Funtime Freddy. Now by by no means are these the original animatronics from the past restaurants, especially since animatronics like the puppet were burned down in the FNAF 6 ending, and others like Funtime Freddy would become Molten Freddy. But now we have two very different topics that come from two very different time periods in the franchise, so the key to connect them is the pizzaplex, and more specifically how the manor where Secret of the Mimic takes place is under the pizzaplex, and you can watch this whole video where I explain how. I go over red bricks, pipes found in both MCM and in the sinkhole, and these 1970s style TVs that are found in the pizzaplex that could have only come from this time period and from MCM. In that video, I actually go over how most locations are connected by one single forest, so make sure to go check that out here. So if these two areas are one and the same, I'm proposing that the souls or agony of the 7 technicians murdered by the Mimic and left in MCM would possess the amalgamation of animatronics, which would then be known as Tangle, where each technician would possess a body or head, and their eyes would even still be lit up, signifying their presence. Now I know that may seem far-fetched, so to attempt to convince you that it's all true, it's important to first understand that MCM or the pizzaplex is haunted. I'm sure that most of you know the theory that MCM is haunted by the spirit of David, Edwin's deceased son who presumably possesses the White Tiger mascot. As we can hear his laughter, he'll randomly appear in front of us, and it's a character clearly similar to Golden Freddy. But I believe it's also haunted by the spirits of the dead technicians. Not only do boxes randomly jump at you and the music from the cardboard cutouts start playing as if someone's trying to get your attention, but as another theorist, Logan Entertainment, pointed out in his own video about the Blob, when you first encounter the Mimic in the elephant suit near the crate where he escapes from, you can find an incomplete head of an elephant suit. Taking a closer look at the head, there appears to be a small light source, and on rare occasions, the light source within the head glows very bright and clearly looks possessed. We can even compare this mask to the bad ending of FNAF 3, where we see the main animatronics alongside Golden Freddy having their mascot heads lit up by a bright light source, meaning they are still possessed. So what if this light source came from one of the dead technicians trying to possess the elephant head or trying to get Arnold's attention? And to me, all of this proves that their souls are still somewhere around MCM, which would eventually become the pizzaplex. Although decades pass between these two time frames, this doesn't mean that these spirits, and vengeful spirits at that, would just disappear or be put to rest. Why wouldn't they possess an animatronic, an amalgamation in the depths of the pizzaplex where their deaths all occurred? Earlier I mentioned how there were a total of 7 dead technicians, and there just happens to be a total of 7 animatronics in the Blob, a perfect amount of souls for each character. Because the Blob is technically in MCM, I think we can even go as far to say that all of the wires, mechanical parts, and animatronic heads all came from the Manor and from this time period. When looking at all of these wires and heads, they look really old. They don't just look destroyed or withered, but they appear to be decades old. This was a detail that always stood out to me, since well-known theories suggest that the Blob is made up of animatronics from the special delivery service, but those animatronics would almost be completely new and wouldn't necessarily look like this. Now I know that would have a lot of lore implications, but we already saw prototype versions of Bonnie and Chica in the basement of MCM, and it could even be the exact animatronics we're seeing returning once again in the Blob. We also know Edwin was working on puppet prototypes for Fazbear's, so the puppet mask without the tears we see here could be one of those prototypes, something abandoned by Edwin but returning here. But with other characters like Mangle, Funtime Freddy, and Circus Baby, it's harder to prove how they would have come from MCM. But we do also know Edwin was working on alternate Fazbear's designs, which could have included early versions of Mangle or the Funtime animatronics. But there's no real way of knowing this, so saying that all the animatronics come from MCM and from 1979 it does have less evidence. But regardless, I still think it's worth considering when trying to solve where these parts came from. But in my last theory video, I covered how Glamrock Freddy might be possessed by Arnold, the protagonist of Secret of the Mimic. You can watch the full video here explaining how that would even be remotely possible, but for the sake of the argument, saying it's true here, voice lines from Glamrock Freddy might also support this claim.
I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I did not want to, but I had no choice. Now I have a choice. I have changed. My friends are here. They are so angry, confused. But I can protect you. I am not me.
Now with the final voice lines about his friends being confused and angry, what if Glamrock Freddy's talking about his friends from Fazbear's Entertainment? Other technicians that he surely knew of and was even friends with. Of course they would be angry and confused as they were murdered by the Mimic and their spirits have not been put to rest. This could also mean that the technicians would actually reunite with the Mimic years later. Now this can be a complete theory on its own, but saying that Burntrap is actually the Mimic, it makes sense why the Blob would target him and why he would want to keep him in the fire. Burntrap or the Mimic would murder them all years ago and this would finally be a form of revenge for them. Now I know this ending ending isn't canon, but it doesn't mean it couldn't happen or that the Blob wouldn't target Burntrap. When looking back at the beginning of the video where I said Security Breach was almost split into two stories, I do think Studio Studios or Scott Cawthon had an idea of the Blob being an entity from the past. This is why they chose animatronics that no longer exist, and not characters like Lefty or Molten Freddy, which were the current versions of characters. It looks like they knew this sinkhole area would be a part of something from the past, which is where these animatronics came from, but they just didn't know what that place exactly looked like. But with Secret of the Mimic, now we do. It's Murray's costume Manor, a tragic tale of 7 technicians who were murdered by a rogue endoskeleton, leaving their spirits to possess the building and eventually tangle. This could also explain why the Blob is attempting to escape in ruin and making all those tunnels. These 7 spirits have presumably been trapped in the sinkhole for decades, but now they would be able to escape where Cassie encounters them. Now in terms of other theories, I made a poll on the channel a few days ago and the votes were actually pretty scattered around, so I do believe this could be possible, but for me the biggest issue is moving on. Although the past games and lore were heavily influenced into these newer games, I still don't think the Blob is possessed by any of those souls or agony. I think that the point of FNAF 6 was to show that they were finally put to rest, besides Golden Freddy and possibly William Afton of course. Especially now with the release of Secret of the Mimic, where it's been made clear that the focus has shifted to new characters, new animatronics, and new tragedies. In terms of the Blob being possessed by souls in the pizzaplex, like the missing children or pizzaplex workers we learn about in the books, it could honestly go either way. But I still lean towards the technicians because for one, the books might not even be canon anymore, and we haven't really seen any focus on these new missing children. Besides the newspaper and one of the endings, the focus has been on other topics and characters like the Blob. And in general, it seems like we can use Secret of the Mimic to solve mysteries that were left unanswered and just confusing. Not only with the Blob, but other topics like William Afton, the FNAF Warehouse, and Fall Fest all finally have answers. And finally, let's look at Glamrock Freddy and why he might be possessed by an entirely new character. A character that not only plays a major role in FNAF Security Breach, but one that seems to be connected to the greater lore and timeline of the franchise, Glamrock Freddy. More than a month ago, the latest FNAF game Secret of the Mimic was released, expanding the already established lore by introducing new characters like Edwin Murray. And over the past couple of videos, I used this new installment to try and answer some of the biggest mysteries from the modern era of the timeline, like who is Mexis or what was Fall Fest. But what if we could also use it to solve a character's identity that has remained a complete mystery for years? Who is Glamrock Freddy and is he even possessed? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover how Secret of the Mimic answers this for us by connecting this character to this game's new protagonist. So, how is Arnold from FNAF's Secret of the Mimic actually Glamrock Freddy? Well, my name is Bronze Films and let's find out together. But I want to give a special thanks to John Cena is Bald, who gave a lot of great ideas in the live stream I did 2 weeks ago that are used in this video, so thank you again. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and I really do appreciate all the support on the channel. So jumping right into things, Glamrock Freddy was one of the main protagonists of Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach and has been the center of discussion ever since this game was released. It can even be argued that this character and his true identity is one of the biggest mysteries to come with this new modern era of the franchise, alongside mysteries like Glitchtrap and Burntrap, but why? Well, the game tries to tell us that the once normal and friendly Glamrock animatronics suddenly turned aggressive and violent during the events of this game. And we can assume that it was because of a virus, the Glitchtrap virus or the Mimic virus, that has corrupted their programming, making them all target Gregory trying to capture him, all except Glamrock Freddy. Instead, Freddy collapses during his performance after he spots someone in the crowd. He then resets during safe mode with Gregory inside his stomach hatch and acts as an ally for the rest of the game. So how? How does Glamrock Freddy avoid being corrupted, and does this answer have a greater meaning? Well, the consensus among fans ever since this game has been released is that there is a much greater meaning. A meaning that connects to other FNAF games into the earliest points in the timeline, possession. It's no secret that possession has played a crucial role throughout this entire franchise, with characters like Springtrap, the 4-man animatronics, and the puppet. So would it really be that hard to believe that possession would return with these newer FNAF games, even though it's more centered around corrupt AI? Well, some of the biggest theories on who can be possessing Glamrock Freddy include Michael Afton, the Crying Child, and even Henry Emily. But what if he's possessed by none of these characters and is instead possessed by someone who was just introduced in the latest FNAF game, Arnold? For a quick summary of Secret of the Mimic, you play as a new protagonist named Arnold, an employee of Fazbear's Entertainment who has been hired to retrieve the schematics of the original Mimic endoskeleton that was created by Edwin. So, going inside of Edwin's manor, Arnold faces the Mimic inside of various different mascots and animatronics like Jackie, Dolly, an elephant, in-progress mascots, a lion suit, a dog, and so much more. Finally, after reaching 4 AM and after retrieving the schematics, Arnold has the choice of giving the schematics back to dispatch or trying to escape. If you do give the schematics back, you can hop back in the work van and continue to drive off. Then, while driving off, it's revealed that Arnold was being tricked by the M1 program, who was impersonating dispatch and is now being fired and sued by Fazbear's Entertainment.
Arnold, there you are. We've been trying to get a hold of you all night. Why didn't you answer? Fazbear Entertainment has no other option but to let you go.
What? I just talked to you. You told me to give you the data diver and I could go home.
So you admit it? You misplaced company property.
No, I gave it to you.
Fazbear Entertainment will hold you personally responsible for lost or stolen property. What did you expect would happen?
I did everything you told me to.
Don't call us. Our lawyers will be calling you.
And that's when it's revealed that the Mimic is actually inside of the van and will attack Arnold. He will then wake up stuffed inside of an animatronic, just like the many other characters from the franchise. Now, in the parachute ending, Arnold tries to escape by venturing down to the basement or to the research and development area of MCM. Here we can find a Fazbear's project that Edwin was working on for William and Henry, the FNAF 1 prototype pizzeria and animatronics. We find the exact same hallways, rooms, and even the same office. We also find prototype Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, and Chica. This is actually the exact same area we find in the bad ending, meaning Arnold was stuffed inside of the FNAF 1 prototype pizzeria. But what animatronic was he exactly stuffed into? Well, alongside the prototypes, we can also find 4 spring-lock animatronics that Arnold wears to avoid the Mimic. We can find Monty, who is of course a reference to Montgomery Gator, a Glamrock animatronic that would be used by Fazbear's decades later. Bub could be a reference to Bubba from FNAF World or to Sparky, a dog-like animatronic that was actually just a hoax. And we can also of course find the original prototype versions of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, which is one of the few times we've seen canon designs for both these characters, a major reveal. And during the gameplay of Secret of the Mimic, there's plenty of evidence actually proving that Fredbear's Family Diner is open during this time. We find pizza boxes from the restaurant, and there are also posters advertising the location inside of the Manor. But when lining up these suits with the bad ending, it's clear that Arnold was stuffed inside of Fredbear. The shape of the animatronic's head and teeth line up perfectly. So what if, after the Mimic stuffs Arnold into the prototype Fredbear suit, Arnold's soul would possess that animatronic, just like the many other times it's happened in the franchise? But how does this connect to Glamrock Freddy? Well, when comparing both these designs, they share a similar overall head and body shape. Prototype Fredbear has shoulder pads, which is something we've only ever seen in the Glamrocks. And he also has a stomach hatch that opens up that Arnold would use to get inside, just like Glamrock Freddy where Gregory climbs inside of. Do you notice the similarities? That's right, I alongside many others believe that Glamrock Freddy could be the repurposed version of prototype Fredbear, making these two animatronics the exact same. Fredbear even has the word prototype on the back of his head, just like Freddy has the word prototype on the bottom of his foot in Ruin. And it honestly wouldn't be that hard to believe since we've seen Fazbear's Entertainment continue to repurpose MCM's characters and designs, like Big Top to Music Man, the Staff Bots, and even Roxy. So if Arnold is possessing Fredbear, that would also mean he's possessing Glamrock Freddy in FNAF Security Breach. Arnold would be stuffed inside of prototype Fredbear, which would then become Glamrock Freddy, with his soul still inside. And I think the biggest piece of evidence comes from Glamrock Freddy's voice lines.
I know what this is. I have been here before. She brought me here. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. I did not want to, but I had no choice. Now I have a choice. I have changed. My friends are here. They are so angry, confused. But I can protect you. I am not me.
With the first line, of course Arnold knows what this place is as he's been down there before all the way back in 1979 when he was trying to escape with the schematics. When Freddy refers to she, we all thought he was referring to Vanessa, but why wouldn't he just say her name or even Vanny? Now it makes much more sense that he was actually referring to M1 or F10N4, who was actually impersonating Fiona, Edwin Murray's wife. It's revealed that F10N4 was impersonating Dispatch to try and take the schematics from Arnold, and in a way it was responsible for luring Arnold to the basement of MCM, where it revealed itself as F10N4, which is a supercomputer. So Freddy was lured here by Fiona. With the next line, I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path. He could have found himself when he realized that he was a part of something that was much bigger. And we can view the line clearing the the path more in a metaphorical sense. I think Arnold is one of the main reasons for big events in the timeline to happen, events that involve William Afton, the Mimic, and even Mexis, events I've covered in previous videos. So in a way, he cleared the path for the rest of the timeline to happen, which would then lead back to Security Breach. With the next few lines about not having a choice, of course we know Arnold didn't. From the beginning of the game, Arnold was forced to travel to MCM even after a 36-hour shift and was forced into facing the Mimic and trying to retrieve the schematics, which would all lead to his death and being stuffed inside of a suit. Now with the final set of voice lines about his friends, I actually think this connects to the other technicians of Fazbear's Entertainment and to the Blob, but that's a topic for another video. But all of this would have to mean that MCM is under the pizzaplex, and you can watch this full video where I explain why. I go over red bricks, the pipes found in both MCM and in the sinkhole, and these 1970s style TVs that are found in the pizzaplex that could have only come from MCM and that time period. In that video, I actually go over how most locations are connected by one single forest, so make sure to go check it out. But I think another really cool connection would be the fact that Arnold is reuniting with the Mimic after decades in Security Breach. Now for the sake of the argument, let's say that Burntrap is the Mimic, even though this can of course be debated. But if this was the case, in the Burntrap ending, the Mimic is reuniting with Arnold, who is now Freddy after all those years, and it could even be a reason why he would want to corrupt him and stop him, the same way he's trying to stop him in FNAF Secret of the Mimic. But I want to make it clear, by no means is this theory perfect. If anything, there's quite a few issues starting with the endings themselves. For the most part, fans can agree that either the parachute or the secret ending is canon, especially since both endings seem to connect to the greater lore of the timeline, meaning that the bad ending where Arnold is stuffed inside of a suit most likely isn't canon. But at the same time, it can honestly go either way, and it can still very easily be canon. Or it's possible that in the parachute ending, the Mimic would still come back for Arnold and would stuff him inside of a Fredbear suit once more. But I know it sounds silly to say that he would come back after just leaving. There's also the issue of how he connects to Gregory. Freddy obviously has some connection to Gregory beyond this game's lore. That's why some fans believe it's Michael Afton and the Crying Child. It's an older brother attempting to protect the younger brother, trying to redeem himself after he wasn't able to years ago. So really the only way to explain this is that Gregory reminded Arnold of his own child. In cut voice lines, we actually learn that Arnold had a family.
What? Next shift. I just finished a 14-hour shift 2 hours ago. Hey man, come on. I haven't been home in days. What family? My parents are dead. My wife left me last year. Oh God, I haven't seen my kid for...
So what if Gregory reminded him of his child that he would essentially abandon after the events of Secret of the Mimic? This would be a chance to make things right, which is why we see Freddy take on a parental role with Gregory. But most importantly, this video is just a theory. By no means am I saying that anything in this video is confirmed or even canon. But like we can do with many mysteries, I think we can use FNAF's Secret of the Mimic to answer who Glamrock Freddy is, and it's also a perfect way to connect this character to the past lore of the games. So what do you guys think? Is Arnold actually Glamrock Freddy from Security Breach? Make sure to comment down below any thoughts or theories, and who do you believe is possessing Glamrock Freddy? But I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button, and thank you all so much for watching.